Well, hello, Forest Meadow, and welcome back to another episode of our sermon reflections. As you know, the last 2 weeks we kind of took off from our sermon reflections. That was intentional and basically out of necessity. But let's hit the ground running today. On Sunday, we spent some time talking about the resurrection and how Jesus turns to his disciples and said, "Slow of heart to believe." You know, there are different struggles that we go through when it comes to trying to understand what it is that God is doing. Sometimes it's not always very clear, and sometimes we just have to confess that in ignorance, Lord, I don't understand, rather than assume that maybe God is not faithful to his promises. Maybe God is not as good as I thought he was. And sometimes there's a misunderstanding on our end. And so when we try to fix that misunderstanding, there's a danger, an inherent danger that comes along, which can lead us towards Phariseeism. If you guys remember Paul the Apostle, he shares this in the book of Philippians. He says that he kind of gives his credentials, you know. He says, if anyone has reason to have confidence in the flesh, I have far more. I was circumcised the 8th day of the nation of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews. As to the law, a Pharisee. As to zeal, a persecutor of the church. As to the righteousness which is in the law, found blameless. Look at Paul's credentials that he's listing here. But whatever things were gain to me, those things I have counted as loss for the sake of Christ. More than that, I count all things to be loss in view of the surpassing value of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and count them but rubbish, so that I may gain Christ. You know, part of the danger when we don't understand God's plan or what he's doing is to pursue it just with sheer knowledge and understanding and perseverance. In other words, we chase after it and try to solve all these problems with human strength. And I will say that that is natural for us to try to do that. But remember, children of God, we are not natural. We have a flesh, but that is not who we are. We are born again, born of the Spirit. And so we have to remind ourselves to walk by the Spirit. And so when we pursue that knowledge, we pursue understanding in our relationship and our walk with God, there's a place for wisdom, but we have to first start in the place that God brought us, which is to the cross. Which Paul points this out in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, how it doesn't make any sense to the Greeks. Because this is not the world's wisdom. You're not going to arrive at the right place with the world's wisdom. And then with the Pharisees, they were trying to pursue this relationship with God as though it were all by their own righteousness, as if they could achieve it. And so human strength, human wisdom, human pursuit doesn't get us to the right place. And I think it's just important for us to recognize this. And Paul, here in this passage, this is, by the way, Philippians chapter 3, Paul recognizes this and he comes to this conclusion. I count all of my learning, everything that I have. It doesn't mean that it didn't contribute to his current understanding of who Jesus was. On the contrary, it does very much contribute. But his Phariseeism, him being a Pharisee of Pharisees is what he calls himself, a teacher of teachers, a leader of leaders. He excels far beyond all of his countrymen is what he tells us. He says, those things didn't matter. It wasn't my status. It wasn't the fact that I was trained by Gamaliel. It wasn't my education that did this. What made sense is when Paul finally met Jesus, when he was blinded and he hears a voice and he says, who are you, Lord? Who's speaking to me? What's happening? And there Jesus speaks to him and he says, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he hears the voice of God. And when he finally has a revelation of who God truly is, then the rest of his learning begins to make sense. But a lot of his learning changed along the ways. He suddenly, within a very short time period, he was making arguments from the Old Testament scriptures that Jesus was in fact the Messiah. And it says that the scriptures say that he was arguing this fact powerfully, right? He was refuting other people with very powerful arguments from the Old Testament. And so it's quite a beautiful thing. But I want us to see the heartbeat that's here in this passage. Whatever things were gained to me, those things I have counted as loss. I've suffered loss of all things so that I may gain Christ and may be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own derived from the law, but that which is through faith in Christ Jesus, which comes from God on the basis of faith. And then we notice how Paul concludes this. He has a goal in mind, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings, being conformed to his death, in order that I may attain the resurrection from the dead. See, Paul uses this logic to say we can just cast off everything that's here in this life, and the goal is to know Christ and to be raised with Christ as well. That this is our goal as believers. This is what we're hoping for, is that one day he will resurrect us with himself. That we're not just going to be raised apart from him and then be sentenced to judgment. No, our hope is in something much deeper than that. That even as Christ was raised from the dead, the same Spirit that was in him now raises us from the dead and gives life to our mortal bodies, resurrects us eternally, right? As we will continue on to live with God and to be in his presence. It is such a beautiful thing. But brothers and sisters, sometimes we just kind of shun these sufferings that he's talking about. He says to know him, the power of his resurrection, and the fellowship of his sufferings. You know, sometimes those sufferings and the hardship, whatever type of hardship it is, those types of things can really get in the way for us as far as our heart is concerned. Because we don't like to go through those types of things. We don't enjoy not knowing the whole plan that God has for us. But sometimes he doesn't let us know. And sometimes he lets us know, just like Jesus did. He told them he would suffer. He told them that he would die, be crucified, and that he would resurrect. This is the whole reason why the Pharisees and the chief priest and Pilate, this is why they had stationed people there to make the tomb secure. It's because they heard Jesus talking about these things and said he made this claim, so let's make sure that his disciples don't try to do something funny here and steal his body away. And so they understood what Jesus was saying, yet his own disciples who were following him everywhere, they didn't get the message. So sometimes it's not that God doesn't speak his plan. Sometimes it's that we cannot understand. We cannot hear, we cannot see, and we have to have one of these times, walking on the road to Emmaus, just like Cleopas and the other disciple who is unnamed, where Jesus speaks to us and reveals to us what is really there, where he opens up our eyes to understand the things in the Scriptures. And so, brothers and sisters, I have an encouragement to us this week. Let's remember that our pursuit of the wisdom and knowledge of God, it is not about an intellectual, cerebral, logically syllogistic type way of thinking. It's not arguing better based off of philosophy or reasoning. It's about knowing him. And guess what happens when we know him? Just like Paul. When we know him and come together with Christ, he reveals part of his heart. He reveals part of his plan. He's not obligated to do this, but even as he told his disciples, right? You read John chapter 14 through 16, and he talks about this. I will disclose myself to you. No longer are you slaves. No longer do I call you slaves. I call you friends. And something amazing and incredible happens when Jesus grabs us and he says, sit down with me and sup with me, dine with me. Let's enjoy this meal together. And he begins to speak and we begin to understand. And so, if anything, our exhortation today is that we would just simply come to the presence of God, come into his presence and say, Lord, give me understanding. I don't understand. And it's not about human wisdom, Lord. I know that that's not the answer. But Father, would you reveal to me what your plan is? Would you show me what your desire is for my life? What should I do in this situation? What should I do in that situation? How, and more important than that, how do I understand these things that are written in the scriptures before me? Because, if there's something that I've seen God do so faithfully, it's answer your prayers. Answer my prayers when we come to him, come to the scriptures and say, God, I don't understand. Help me to understand. Give me the wisdom to see what I cannot see. I know that I'm missing things. And so, brothers and sisters, I experience this on a weekly basis, sometimes on a daily basis when I come to the scriptures and I don't understand something. There has been so many times when it's Saturday night and I still feel like, Lord, I don't feel like I understand something. I feel like this passage is still elusive. I feel like I'm missing something. Show me what it is that I'm missing, Lord. And in those moments of desperation, I pray and I say, Lord, I've got to go to bed. And I say, help it to make sense when I wake up tomorrow morning. And God is so faithful, time after time after time, to make sure that it makes sense. And maybe it doesn't always make as much sense as I would like it to, but he is so faithful in doing that. Sometimes a passage to me does not ever become clear until I open my mouth and begin to teach it. So those are just some confessions from me. But those types of things happen. And it's not for lack of study. I could study all the time that I have throughout the week, and sometimes something still doesn't make sense until I humble myself and come back to the feet of Jesus and say, Lord, I cannot understand unless you open my eyes and teach me and help me to know you more. And so that's my encouragement for us. Let's run to him. Let's ask him to open up our eyes so that way he gets the glory. It's not about us. It's about him. And so with that said, why don't we go ahead and move on to our questions for the week. Our first question is this: what prevented the men from believing the women when they told them what they had seen? Such a powerful question right there. Number 2, why did Jesus meet with the men walking to Emmaus? Number 3, why did he not reveal himself and feign ignorance of the recent events? Number 4, what was accomplished by Jesus getting them to talk? The disciples, that is. Number 5, what did they not know, nor could they even imagine had happened? Number 6, how did Jesus enlighten them, and why were they able to listen and understand? Number 7, why did Jesus suggest he was going to continue walking? Number 8, why did Jesus finally reveal himself, and why did he wait until after their conversation? Number 9, what was required for them to understand? And number 10, what is required for us to truly understand and to participate in God's plan for us? Well, that's about all the time that we have for today. I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and thank you for your desire to dig deeper into the scriptures. You say, Mike, I thought you had a teaser. Aren't you going to tell us where we're going next week? This week, the answer to that question is a little complicated. So we're not going to have a teaser for this next week other than you should be here this next week and come and join us. We welcome you to come and do that. Thank you so much. I hope you guys have a great day.